Hickok from the University of Vermont. Today I want to talk a little bit about single leg strength training and some progressions that I found pretty effective. Single leg strength training is obviously really important. It's been talked about a lot lately. Don't need to downplay bilateral training. Bilateral training is great. It needs to be a staple of your program. But single leg strength training is really important and should be thrown in there. Think of it just another tool to kind of add to your toolbox to help develop your athletes. Some benefits of single leg strength training are not only injury prevention. When you really load only one limb, really challenging the proprioception within the ankle, knee, and hip, and get some of that body awareness, some of those kinesthetic cues to help get those athletes to keep them healthy, but also have them perform better. From a performance standpoint, if you look at most athletic movements, they're performed on one leg. So it just makes sense. Why wouldn't we want to try to develop some strength under those same kind of circumstances? So when I'm thinking about programming my single leg training for my athletes, I kind of break it down into two categories. One category is what I call unilateral supported, and then I have another one called unilateral unsupported, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So unilateral supported is anything where you're training one leg, so at the same time your back leg is supporting the other leg. So anything like a lunge, any lunge variation, walking lunges, reverse lunges, rear foot elevated split squat, or step ups. And then what we're going to talk about today is my other category that I'll call unilateral unsupported. And again, I didn't make this up. Many people use it, but it kind of makes sense to me, and that's what I want to talk about today. And unilateral unsupported is anything where the other leg is not supporting the leg that's being used. And again, this is really going to challenge the athlete's balance, some of their proprioceptions, and things of that nature. But the key is just progressing in the right way. So before we get into the single leg unsupported progressions, make sure your athletes, number one, can do stuff bilaterally and have some good strength bilaterally, but also make sure that they can really handle the supported versions. If you can't do a lunge, or if an athlete can't do a step up without wobbling, falling all over the place, or even a rear foot elevated split squat, it's going to be really hard for them to progress quickly enough through these and really get out of this what they really need to get out of it. So where I begin is I want to make sure the athletes, number one, can sit back into their hip and make this a really a non-quad dominant exercise. I really want it to be hip dominant and really use those glutes and hamstrings. So I'll always give them a counterbalance. So we use a 5 or 10 pound plate, and I always teach them to kind of push that out away from them. What that does, it really allows them to sit back and really load those glutes and hamstrings and use them in a way that's going to help that transfer onto the field. I also will start using a box. Here we have these stands, but you can use a plyo box or anything like that. But I really want them to be able to handle that eccentric load first, right? Because if they can't lower themselves down slowly and under control, it's really going to be hard to be in a good position to really fire up and use the muscles the way we want. So step number one, we have the box here. Again, we want about parallel height, so hip crease just below parallel, and then we can progress from there. But from right here, we're going to have them push the plate out. I want them to sit back. They're going to lower themselves down slow under control for a couple seconds. And at the bottom, I'm going to have them stand right up on 2 feet. All right? We need them to keep them here until they can handle that. If they're really crashing down and they're looking like they're going down, they hear it slam down, we got to keep them there and put them in a good position to be successful in the future. But once they can prove to me they can handle that, the next step is just like a box squat. I want them to sit. I'm going to tell them to stay tight, but they can sit and then drive up through the heel using those glutes and hamstrings to come up. So I'm going to show you from the front and from the side and just talk about a few things I'm looking for. So what that's going to look like is here, they're going to push that out. They're going to sit slow under control. So I'm completely unloaded, but I'm really tight through here. My low back, everything's really tight, and I'm driving straight up. Okay? A couple of things I'm going to look for. Number one is make sure they're really sitting back. Again, remember I said I really want to target glutes and hamstrings. Don't want this to be too much of a quad dominant thing where it's really kind of pulling on that patella tendon, aggravating the knee there. So I want them to sit back. So from the side, this is what it's going to look like. I'm going to push it back, really sit back. At the bottom, I'm looking for that knee, not to be, you can maybe cross the toe a little bit, but you really don't want that thing shooting out. So you're going to see people that haven't done this before, real quad dominant, are going to shoot that forward, and they're going to come up off their heel, and you can just look at that. It looks terrible, and it doesn't feel well at all. Also, from the front, again, injury prevention standpoint, we don't want that knee to cave in, so we want to reinforce that rotation of the foot outward. All right, trying to create some torque there. Keep that knee at least in line with the foot, usually maybe tracking outside of the pinky of that foot. So if you can see them coming down and then knees caving in, we really want to reinforce that and just stay on it because we don't want to reinforce a bad position. From there, if they can handle sitting down, staying tight, coming up, the next step, what I do is I have them sit, just lightly touch and come back up. And what we're going to prepare them for next is where they're actually up on a box or a bench and there's nothing underneath them. So they'll be here, they'll come down, slow under control, sitting back, just touch and drive up. And again, making sure their knee, ankle, knee, and hip are in line and they're not shooting that knee forward when they come up. Now, another way to progress a little bit further is to make them get a little bit lower. So, advantage, we kind of use this here, makes it about 3-inch greater deficit. So now we can get a little bit deeper into that squat and then drive up. One thing you might notice about my off leg, notice how I'm kind of keeping it bent right next to that other leg. Not a huge fan of pistols for athletes. I love doing it myself. It's a great exercise. But when I'm dealing with my soccer players, hockey players, people that have a tendency to have a lot of hip flexor, groin type issues, a lot of times when you have them hold that leg out there, they get really tight and crampy. And you'll see them kind of cramp, and that's the last thing you need as a strength coach is to do a bunch of pistols with your athletes, especially soccer players, have them go out to the practice field, and they have to kick a lot of long balls and just aggravate that. So I kind of teach, hey, let's keep that foot, be honest, keep it off the ground, keep it just right next to there, and then it saves a lot of those issues. From here, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to teach them to handle their own body, make them all the way down and up with nothing underneath them. So if they can handle that, next thing to try is right here. So they're up on the box, again, still using the counterbalance. Just let this leg dangle. You might want to kick it out a little bit just for a counterbalance. But we're going to be here, pushing that plate out. Here we get nice and low, and then drive straight up. The biggest part is that's a huge jump from just touching down to the box to there. So I have thrown in this other progression, which I call a rack squat, rack single leg squat, where you just kind of use the rack here. Again, this leg slightly bent. You're going to come all the way down. Just kind of use the rack to kind of counterbalance them, and then up. And what that does, kind of allows them to get in that real deep position with a little bit of a spot, so they can kind of build some strength down there. Again, if you've never been down that deep, they might not have the ability to come up on their own. It's a way to kind of throw it in there and get a little progression within that. From there, what we'll do is progress to a goblet style. So we'll be up there and let the guys go, sets of 5-6 reps with as much weight as they can handle. As long as their knees are in a good position and they're executing, the sky's the limit. Again, so single leg training, throw it in there at least 1 or 2 times a week, along with all your bilateral stuff. One day, try your typical single leg supported things like your lunges, walking lunges, step ups, those things. And then the other day, let's try to work on some of these things. Hope that helped, guys. Take care.